the webinar, so it is recorded, and it'll be up on YouTube shortly after the presentation. But also, we have two means of asking questions. There is the chat feature, which is for more spare-of-the-moment questions and technical issues. All technical issues should be sent to me. And then there's the Q&A tab, which is for longer questions and questions at the end of our presentation. Yeah, I think that covers it. So without further ado, Sam.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here, even though it's really early in the morning here in South Korea. Let's see. So what I want to do is just get started, and my goal is to spend about 40 minutes going through these materials, and after that, take questions or have some discussion and so on. So what I want to talk about today is social network analysis, but not the social network analysis that we ordinarily think about if you're familiar with that concept. Instead, I want to talk about social network analysis for qualitative work. So even though we'll refer to some of these quantitative measures that people in SNA utilize, really that's not what I'm using SNA for here, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. First of all, let me just point to a couple of precursors. The strange thing is that anthropology has been central in many ways to the development of social network analysis, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a recent book that actually talks about the role of anthropology, and yet anthropologists have been working on different topics in SNA, really, post-World War II up until the present, even though now it's associated more with like mathematical sociology. So just a couple of precursors and a plug-in for our book that I co-authored with Matthew Durrington called Networked Anthropology, and we look at some of these different. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that's cool. We look at some of these different techniques for utilizing SNA for qualitative research, and that. Finally, let me just mention that there are a number of possible workshops and seminars and stuff like that that you can attend. There's a AAA workshop coming up if you're going to the meetings in December. That's being given by, I think it's Jeffrey Johnson is doing that. That'll be nice. I don't know. When I went to that a few years ago, it was mostly about UCINet, which is an older software, but maybe they've changed it. But the concepts are the same. It's still matrix algebra and using social network analysis for your research. There's also courses. Russ Bernard, University of Florida, has been doing that NSF course on social network analysis during the summertime. I think it's on every other year. There's also a bunch of free courses that you can get to through various MOOCs and stuff like that. So I invite you to look for those things if it's something that appeals to you. Okay, basic concepts. I'm not sure how familiar you are with some of these ideas, but the kinds of concepts that we use in social network analysis, just a shorthand for talking about this, really. This is a typical social network analysis graph, and you've seen some. They're for whatever reason they've become a favorite graphic for publications dealing with a networked life in general. Let's just talk about a couple of these concepts, and then we'll move on. Nodes, edges. Well, nodes and edges there's a node. Where's my little pen? I don't know why I keep flipping out.
Sam,
Yeah.
you need to click the PowerPoint within the WebEx system.
I am.
I think you're click. Okay. Are you okay? Good.
So I mean, I don't know. It keeps advancing or moving of its own accord. Anyway, here's a node. Here's an edge. A couple of these other concepts. Path length is a really useful way of looking at this. Nodes, what can they be? People, they can be institutions, they can be words, ideas, and so on. The edge is some kind of a connection to something else, some other kind of node. The path length is the distance between them. Wow, I'm flashing out again. Andrew, a little bit of help there?
So
I'm not sure what's going on, but I keep sort of losing the PowerPoint, and it comes back in. And
interesting. Okay, let's. What page are you supposed to be on?
This one right here, working with network graphs.
Okay. Because yeah, so right now mine says it's on page 6. It looks like you're supposed to be on.
4 is the one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. Let me look into that for you. Yeah, so just keep on. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Here we go.
Okay, we good?
Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. You should be good to go now.
Okay, so path length. So here's one node up here. What's the path length from that node here to this node over here? Well, it's 1, 2. And that's a useful idea for talking about distance between people or between institutions. How many hops do you have to go through to get from one place to another on a social network graph? It becomes very useful when we're talking about the flow of information, the closeness of ideas, things like this. Now let's go back to any of these other ones. Cluster, density. Let's talk about density a little bit. So this graph right here, not particularly dense, and density here just means the number of interconnections between nodes. So if all these nodes, and there are probably a couple hundred here, if they were all connected to each other, in other words, if the graph had maximum density, it would just be a big mess of black lines. And so this graph, typically in social networks that we have online, it's not very dense. So things like Facebook graphs and so on, they might be huge, but they're not dense. Let's see, bridge, structural hole. So when we're looking at distances and connections between different nodes, one thing that's hopefully should be pretty clear is that some nodes are more connected than others. So I can see this one out here is sort of connected to these, but not really well connected to others. In other words, there's a kind of structural hole there, where this cluster of nodes seems not to really be connecting to other structures of nodes. Or to give another example, if we look at, let's see, this guy right here. So this node up here seems to connect a couple of different network clusters here and here. So this node acts as a bridge between these two clusters here. Okay, so those are some basic concepts. The last thing I wanted to talk about was ethics. And this is obviously a huge topic in its own right. The kinds of things that we're doing here, with social network analysis works with the terms of use for social media like Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, and so on. So in other words, we're not scraping. Scraping is when you, for example, develop a search engine that goes into Facebook and scrapes the data off of personal web pages, personal Facebook pages, for your analysis. We're not doing that. We're working with the API for all of these different social media, API application programming interface that spells out exactly what data are available and how they can be used. But in terms of anthropology, I believe that we should go beyond that. So, for example, you'll see that I run through a couple of examples in just a bit with Twitter and Facebook. And something that I don't do is show the actual posts themselves. And in my own research, I don't use the words that people have tweeted, for example, which on the one hand wouldn't be a problem, since if you tweet something, well, by definition you're making it public. I mean, that's the whole point. And Facebook as well. I mean, if you post something on a community site, which is what I'm using for the example in today's seminar, that's public as well. And that was the point. That's why you put it on that community site. But ethically, though, I think we need to think seriously about what people intended for the things that they posted. If you tweet something, then that context of that particular platform does not necessarily mean that you intended that tweet to be dissected as a piece of discourse or republished in an academic paper. So my own feeling is that you can use Twitter, and it's very useful in order to sort of get an idea of what's going on, and to make sort of general statements about what people are saying. But that if you want to go beyond that, you need to contact these people and see if you can talk to them or utilize what they've said, and so on. And so that's what I mean by ethics, and that's very much in motion all the time, especially as as the terms of use for these social media change, and as people's own thoughts about what they're willing to share or not share change. Okay, so one thing that I do with my students is ask them, on this graph, if the nodes are people and the lines, the edges are the relationships between people, who would you choose as an interlocutor? And there's obviously no correct answer, but we can talk about different concepts that would help us to decide maybe who to talk to. A couple of the concepts that are very useful in social network analysis are those belonging to centrality. So we can talk about centrality in many ways. Basically, centrality is a measure of the importance of a node. How important is that person? How important is that relationship? Well, centrality can help us answer that. There are three kinds of basic centrality that SNA people talk about. The first one is the most obvious, degree centrality. Degree centrality would be the number of connections that each node has. And as you can see over here, well, who's got the most connections? Maybe it's this guy right here. Who knows? I have to go and count the number of connections to other nodes, but that's a possibility. So that's, in terms of degree centrality, that would be the most important person. But there are other kinds of centrality as well. This one, closest centrality, which, as I mentioned, indicates how close a node is to all the other nodes. And that has to do with path length. So if this node is closer to all these nodes via path length. Remember, path length is like 1, 2, 3, like that. Then this node would be the most important. But if it's another node that's close to all these, then that would be the most important. So in this case, we're not necessarily looking at the most connected, but the closest. So that would probably, even though this person over here seems to have a lot of connections, right? A lot of density, or a lot of the degree centrality is pretty high. At the same time, because this node is kind of off to the side and marginalized, the path length is longer to these other nodes, so it's probably not going to win in terms of closeness centrality. The final kind of centrality is what we call betweenness centrality, and that's how important a node is in terms of its it lies between the other nodes on the graph. And how you compute that is there's a complex equation that we're not even going to look at, where you have to figure out the number of times that, if it's this node, how many times does this node lie on the shortest path between other nodes? So if it's going to here, let's see, if the path is here, then here it lies. Actually, this is going to be the shortest path there. I'm trying to think of another example. Okay, let's do that. So if it's here to here, then this node lies on the shortest path between this one and this one. Anyway, so that's how you would compute that for every node in the graph. And if that's a few thousand nodes, yeah, that's why the software is so great. So that's centrality. So in other words, if we're looking at degree centrality, closest centrality, or betweenness centrality, we've got 3 different measures of importance in the graph. So if you want to think of it like in terms of like high school metaphors, you know, are you the most popular, or are you the most well positioned? So you know, maybe you bridge the band people and the theater people and the athletes. So in other words, even though you don't necessarily have the same number of aggregate friends, because of the important position that you occupy, you would have a high betweenness centrality. I think I have another graph here that sort of points that out. Yeah, I probably need 2 because we get all messy with this. So if we look at this one, for example, and once again, notice that I've removed names and stuff like that from it. You can see, okay, you've got different relationships and so on. Maybe in terms of degree centrality, it's probably going to be this person over here. I don't know exactly what the numbers are. But in terms of something like betweenness centrality, who might be the most important or an important node in this graph? Well, you know what? It might be someone like this over here, and they don't have that many aggregate connections. But look at the space that they occupy. They're bridging all these different groups together. They lie, in other words, on that shortest path between different parts of the graph. Okay. One of the other concepts that sort of follows on that is weak ties, and it's something that you've probably heard many times. What a weak tie is, what a strong tie is. Tie strength is another useful concept, and you know, if you look at this node over here, we can say, oh, okay, it looks like they have a strong tie to this node, but a weak tie perhaps to this one. And you know, if we're looking at if this is actually like a strong bond of friendship or some kind of relatedness, and this one is, then there's probably going to be a kind of weak tie, which I'll sort of try to represent with a hashed line here between these two, and that's a sort of one of the laws of social network analysis, that there might be some weak tie between them. Mark Granovetter, who sort of came up with that idea, pointed out back in the 1970s that these weak ties are extremely important in terms of giving people access to resources, especially new resources. His famous example in that 1973 article, The Strength of Weak Ties, was about getting jobs. You know, how do you get jobs? Not through strong ties like your best friends, but through weak ties. You know, somebody knows somebody. Oh yeah, don't I have a cousin who works in human resources? That's a weak tie, maybe, and that's the kind of connection that allows me to gain access to resources that I wouldn't ordinarily have. Something that we see in social media is really the importance of weak ties being exploited, packaged. These are actually weak tie machines, if you will. So Facebook, for example, enables people to maintain a huge pool of weak ties. Think of all those, you know, friends from school and college and different places where you've worked, and all of them end up being sort of maintained in a kind of a generic way on Facebook, and then at some point, you know, if you happen to visit the city where that person's living in, you can access that weak tie and maybe turn it into a stronger tie. Other kinds of ties, since we're on the topic, you know, things like social media also enable us to collect a huge pool of what's been called latent ties. And if you think about, you know, if you join a Facebook group for, you know, a planned demonstration or some kind of social activism, well, there's, you know, maybe there's 2,000 people that have also liked that, or people who are posting about that or something like that. You don't know them, and you don't have them on your own Facebook as friends, but they are latent ties that you might exploit in terms of maybe later you'll add them into your friend pool. There's also relationships that we might form to different non-human entities, and I think this is one of the really interesting parts about social network analysis. There's nothing there that says that our nodes have to be human at all. They can be discourse, they can be agencies, organizations, they can be ideas, concepts, theories, and it allows us in this sort of very sort of horizontal plane of relationships to envision all kinds of human, non-human relationships. There's a couple of concepts there that are useful. If we're talking about the stuff that we're doing today, is going to be unimodal network analysis, where we're just looking at, you know, the nodes are all people, the edges are, well, actually no, they're not going to be all people, but the nodes are all one thing, and the edges are all going to be relationships between those one thing. So we do one with people, we'll do one with words, we'll do one with videos, so just one thing. Bimodal is when we're talking about two things and how they're related. So for example, people and organizations. We could do social network analysis for anthropology and graduate programs, and look at how different people are related to different programs. That would be bimodal. So nodes are people and graduate programs. Finally, we have multiplex. Multiplex describes different kinds of edges. So for example, if we do a social network graph of family and friends, then we've got two different kinds of edges. One for family, one for friends. Okay, let's go on and talk a little bit about NodeXL. So the examples are mostly, I refer briefly to another one, called Jeffy. But NodeXL is a free open source plugin for Microsoft Excel. So the good news, it's free, it's open source. The bad news, you'll need Microsoft Excel, and you'll need to do it on a Windows or Linux-based PC, no Macs. So that's the good and the bad of it. It's something that was developed, partially at least, at the University of Maryland at College Park, and it's really a useful tool. It's something that continuously gets updated and tweaked, and there are all kinds of little problems that arise. But like other free software, I grin and bear it and try to get my students to do the same. There's a book, I'm not trying to plug it, I had nothing to do with writing this book, Analyzing Social Media Networks with NodeXL. It's a little bit outdated now. I think it's already 2 or 3 years old, but it's by the same people who made the software, and the different case studies and stuff in it are useful, and they're great as an introduction to what the software can do. Okay, so let's say that you downloaded your NodeXL and you've got it going. The next step for you be to try to download some plugins. One thing that we'll do today is look at Facebook a little bit, and in order to access Facebook, you'll need to get the plugins for it. And at the NodeXL site, you can refer to this later on if you want to go back. You can get those plugins, and there's some brief instructions there about how to get them, and then finally, you've got to get them on your computer, loaded up onto a folder so the application can find them. And so you'll want to do that as well. And I've had some problems with that. I've had to reload them several times. But you know, I can eventually get the thing to work, and that's great for data. The other popular social network analysis software out there that's also free and open source is Jeffy, developed by a French group, and it's visually it's more appealing. A lot of people will sort of move from one to the other. They'll download data through the plugins on NodeXL, and then they'll export it into Jeffy to work on the visualization. So you can get some very striking graphs out of Jeffy. Okay, let's look at an example. So you've got your NodeXL, you've downloaded it, you put in your plugins, and you're ready to go. This is, you know, I'm doing a bunch of stuff in Korea this year as part of a Fulbright, and one thing that I've been working on is public space. So in downtown Seoul, right there in front of Gyeongbokgung Palace, there's a big open square, which actually is kind of a new thing in Seoul. It was developed just over the last few years, Gwanghwamun Gwangjang, Gwanghwamun Plaza, and the plaza has become this very interesting public space, and sort of shared space for social activism, for all kinds of tourism events, and all kinds of different sort of corporate things as well. So they're all together typically at the same time. It's really interesting to see that unfold. So one thing that I've done here, what if we looked for Gwanghwamun, which is the name of the plaza, on Twitter? And you know, it's a good example. Hello, you don't need to use English or Roman letters. You can do this thing with any language. So I'm going to do a search on Twitter, and in order to do that, I go to the pull-down menu in NodeXL, and we import Twitter. In this case, it's a Twitter search network, and in order to use that, you'll have to actually have a Twitter account. In fact, I got my Twitter account a few years ago just so I could do this. And you download the search data. Twitter, one of the issues that we'll talk about maybe later on, the terms of use for social media data have changed. In other words, the social media platforms themselves have reduced or changed access to their data. Twitter, decided that was valuable stuff, so they no longer give as open access to the vast majority of researchers, which includes people like me. So that's fine, but that means that we get less stuff. Anyway, so you download your Twitter, and if you go to this tab over here, refresh graph, then you can see this huge mess, which you're like, if you're like me, you're like, well, what do I do with that? That's just a bunch of dots. The next step after downloading data on NodeXL is to clean up the data so you can do something with it. So to do that, you head over to Graph Metrics right up here. Nice little pull-down menu. I habitually run all the graph metrics. Why not? I'm not a quant person per se, but it doesn't hurt me to run all the metrics. One thing that's going to do, though, is allow me to start to organize my graph more clearly. So I can go over and start to find groups of nodes. This is one of the big capabilities in NodeXL, is to look at this big mess of dots and say, okay, well, are some of these nodes related to each other, and how? So in this case, I'm looking for connected components, something that connects these nodes together into groups, so I can start to sort of see what's going on and how they differ from each other. So I do that. I come up with a bunch of different groups, and then I'm going to lay out my graph again. I head down over here to layout options, and I can lay out by group, and there it is right there. I can put each little group that I've discovered into their own box, which is still connected to other boxes, but I can see it now. And the result is that. So look, there we go, from complete chaos to somewhat less chaotic. You can see that there's different groups that NodeXL has identified, and we can still see that there are connections between these different groups. That's not being hidden or anything like that, but we've organized them in such a way that now they say, okay, now why are these groups separate? What's going on in each group? And that will help us to understand who's using this site, this public space in Seoul, and sort of what they're using it for. So I can look at the different tweets. I just told you that I wasn't going to use the tweets. Well, for this particular example, I'm just showing you a couple of the tweets that are in each group cluster, and that's to sort of say, okay, well, who exactly is using this site? So if we look at different tweets in different groups, we can get an idea. Better yet, what we can do is find the most central or the most important, depending on how we define that, post tweet in each group and find out what they're on about. And that's going to give us an idea of what that group is for. So what I did over here, I went into my Excel table, and I organized my nodes by between the centrality from greatest to least. And that's one of the great things about this as well, is that it's Microsoft Excel. So you can go up, pull down tab, any kind of numerical measure you can organize from greatest to least. So there you go. And so I can look at that node and go, okay, what was that particular post? And I can't even read it. I don't know what it is. It's like very small on my screen, but that's the most important node for that group. And I can do the same thing for other groups and find out what they're on about. So now I'm getting a sense of what the field is here. If you want to think of it again as a physical space, because that's what I'm talking about, during the several day period that I downloaded this Twitter data for, I get a bunch of posts that are about different topics by different groups. So now I know who the most important people are, depending on how I define that, and how people are connected to each other, and if it's an issue or an event, the different coalitions around that. So in my case, I'm very interested in this ongoing protest in Gwanghwamun, Gangjiang, that has to do with the families of children who died in the Sewol ship disaster off of the southwest coast of Korea, and that protest has been going on for a few months now. So we can see people sort of picking up these different issues, talking about them in different ways, and organizing some kind of collective action around them. Okay, let's do one more quickly, and then you know what, we'll go to some questions. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the idea of helping using social network analysis to help me define a field site. And for this one, I'm very interested in this Facebook group called Gulmukubola, which means sort of let's or look at the alley. And it's a Facebook site that organizes mostly photos about small alleyways, which is sort of a vanishing sort of experience in South Korea as places are developed and redeveloped over time. So this sort of Facebook group is people who visit these places, and post photos of them, talk about them. So in order to sort of get a sense of well, where are we talking about in terms of places, but also in terms of different groups, I decided to do a Facebook search. So I downloaded my Facebook plugins. I went over and selected for the import options that I'm going to download things from Facebook community sites. Okay, in order to do that, you'll need to log into Facebook and specify some search parameters for the API at Facebook and download it. And again, as with our Twitter example, you get a big mess. In this case, it's a bunch of nodes, a bunch of posts, texts, and so on. A really sort of rich bunch of data, but you got to kind of clean it up a little bit. One thing I did to sort of start the ball rolling was I got rid of the text part. I just simply dropped those labels. I kept the text on the spreadsheet, but the labels are gone. So now I've just got a mess of dots, but I can go beyond that, and I can start to, as in the preceding example, I can organize them according to group. So I did the exact same thing. I went in and did some graphmetrics. After that, I had NodeXL identify groups. That's the groups option there. Then I laid out the graph again, putting each group in each box, and now I have this sort of nice little well-organized or better organized graph to look at. And as before, I went ahead and ranked my nodes so I could see which ones are supposed to be most important or not. And as before, I can sort of figure out, oh, okay, so these, I can actually go and look at the pictures that they posted on Facebook and say, okay, that picture was really meaningful to people. That seems to have gotten a lot of comments, a lot of likes. So I can start to say, okay, those particular photos are important sites for this sort of Gomokul Bola, this look at an alley group. But I can also say who is doing that. So I did something similar with NetViz, which is an application that's available on Facebook that allows me to download data from the API the same way, but it's like clear somehow that it gives me a sense of who the different players are. And again, it's too small for me to read. Maybe you can read it. There are a lot of different agencies and nonprofits. I think that's sort of very important, that this kind of work is at least amenable to a lot of different groups right now in South Korea. So in terms of field site, I've got places that are considered to be important or endangered or interesting, and I've also got a different agencies and organizations who are involved with recording or involved with organizing to preserve these areas. So in other words, I've started to specify a field site based on my Facebook analysis. Okay, so I've got a couple other examples of stuff that we can do, but what I wanted to do was to see if folks have any questions and any kind of clarification stuff. You know, if you've never done this before, there's a bit of a ramp up, but not much actually, and you can pretty much start cranking away on social network analysis almost right away. And you know, having taught it for a few years now, I can tell you that's exactly what happens. Students can pretty much come up with something after 30, 40 minutes. So questions?
Yeah, amazing software. Definitely something to use for the next project. But just to get it started off, I had a question about, you talked briefly about non-human entities, and I was wondering if you foresaw the use of bots as affecting research going forward. They'll only be more prevalent.
Right. I mean, that's something that when we're looking at like Twitter networks, clearly when you download stuff, we all know if you're on Twitter that some of those accounts are not humans, and some of them are advertising. Some of them are just automated Twitter accounts that collect interesting materials based on search terms and then repost them. For the things that I'm doing here, it's really not an issue. So if we were doing quantitative work here, that would be a problem. I want to strip those out because they don't represent the sort of intentional social action. But for qualitative research, well, I'm actually looking at sort of what they're posting and how they're connected to each other. So I can tell. And I mean, the ones that are honest will have bot in the name. So those are definitely issues. People have talked about that at length in the social network analysis world. But for qualitative stuff, because we're not looking at these enormous sets of millions and millions of nodes, it's not really a big issue.
Cool. All right. We have a question from Nick, which is, how would you envision an anthropologist using SNA? Can you give examples of such already taking place?
Sure. I mean, that's what the examples that I have here are pretty much about that. That's what we've been using. Our book, Network Anthropology, has got several examples of that. I can see, and I've used SNA for sort of each stage of research in terms of the kind of pre-work that we do for field work, in terms of analyzing events, in terms of analyzing also your own work. One thing that the last example that I have in these slides is an analysis of our own videos that we posted on YouTube and looking at how those videos are related to other videos. And that's a kind of analytics that we can do with social network analysis. So we can see actually how our work is relating to other representations. So in that case, it's a YouTube video channel for Anthropology by the Wire, which is a project that we've been working on, me and Matt Durrington, for the past few years that has to do with representing Baltimore. So we can use SNA to look at the relationship between those videos and other video representations of Baltimore and see how they're related, what comes up, which videos share the same kind of conceptual space as our videos, and that kind of sort of post-field work, which we would argue is really part of the fieldwork experience, is something that allows us to say, okay, you know, our work is sort of engaging these other materials in this way and helping us to chart sort of future directions for where our public anthropology should go. So, Nick, that was kind of a lengthy explanation, but yeah. So I think you can use SNA before, during, and after.
Very cool. Stephen asks, I can see that NodeXL has some interesting features for working with social media data, but do you think it offers significant advantages over UCNet or PAJEC, excuse my pronunciation, for working? Yep.
I think that the best advantage. Well, okay, let's talk about the biggest one. It's so simple. There's basically very little that you have to do to kind of learn how to do this. You know, it's this kind of Pyrrhic victory here that it's free and open source, but it's also Microsoft Excel. The good side of that kind of Faustian bargain is that you know how to do it, and you meaning students, people. If you've done anything on Excel ever, then doing stuff with NodeXL is intuitive, and that also is a kind of flexibility. You can take that spreadsheet, which is all you got, and you can dump it into all kinds of different forms. So that's something that UCINet, which I've used quite a bit. It's a little bit sometimes clunky. It's an older software. It doesn't play as well with other applications. And PAJEC is actually, if you're working with that, that's ultimately more powerful, especially because you can create your own inquiries for a social media's API. At the same time, the ramp up is like going to be more steep, and for classroom use especially, and for the kind of use that I'm talking about here for qualitative research, this is just so available and so easy, and again, so intuitive.
Nice. So this is more of an abstract question, but how do you see the future of social networking going?
Right. I mean, one thing that has changed over time would be the access that we have to these data, and it's Twitter, for example. A couple years ago, they used to give researchers access to about just anyone access to about 10% of tweets. So if you ran some kind of a search query on Twitter's API, you would have access. You would get back, no more than 10% of the total database. Well, now that's 1%, and the people who have total access or more access would be Twitter's corporate partners. So, I mean, I think this is one big thing, is that, if knowledge is power and money, then academics get pushed to the edge of that. So the research that we're doing may be less and less, not possible, but when we're looking at big data as this sort of field in itself, we have to wonder how useful the findings are in big data analysis when they're more and more limited by the different social media platforms out there. On the other hand, if we're looking at SNA for qualitative research, some of those issues fall away. I mean, I'm not making any kind of generalization. You know, I'm not saying that I have all the tweets for this public space in Seoul, for example. That's not the argument. I'm just saying I can use SNA to help me to identify people and agencies that I might want to contact and talk to. So, you know, I would have to say that based on what I'm seeing right now in the world of social media, big data analysts should be scared because they're just not going to have access to things that are more and more being locked away by corporations. On the other hand, if we're using it for other kinds of research, I think that will probably still continue into the future.
Cool. Yeah. So actually, along those lines, do you see the IRB process changing in the near future, just as people get more aware of this?
Yeah, this is something that we talk about in network anthropology. I mean, the idea that you're using this stuff for your research, analyzing it, downloading it. Well, number one, most IRBs require some education on that. They really don't know much about that world. I mean, if you think about all the stuff that we ordinarily write into an IRB application, we're going to collect the data. It'll be stored in my cabinet. It'll be destroyed after 3 years. All this stuff that we have to write in the application, they just don't really make sense with social media. You know, something like that, you'll need to really educate your IRB about what that means and what the ethical mores and dilemmas are. As I said at the beginning of the seminar, you know, the ethics that my colleagues in other fields, like, you know, communications people, they got no problem downloading every tweet they can get their hands on and analyzing it and parsing them and so on. I'm suggesting, on the other hand, that, you know what, people probably didn't write that tweet thinking that it would be part of your academic paper. So, you know, maybe you shouldn't use it like that. And I've chosen not to. So the research that I'm doing certainly includes talking to people, but does not include taking people's tweets and using them in a context that they did not intend initially. So, you know, things like this. And actually, I've had pretty good luck with my IRB, but every IRB is different, and it depends on, you know, who's on that board. And as we know, anthropologists tend to be on the short end of things in the IRB, which is mostly dominated, as we know, by the health sciences. So really trying to communicate with folks to let them know what the dangers are and how you're addressing them.
All right. Do we have any other questions? It's about 5 till, and I'm sure you have stuff to do this morning, so I don't want to keep you any longer than necessary.
Yeah, you know, let me just skip to the end here, and if you all want to look at this on YouTube, or say, Andrew, so will the PowerPoints also be there for people, or just the video?
Yeah, so the video will be up on YouTube. You can also download the material and the video through WebEx client, although they use a RAF or a ARF file, which is not always the most easy to deal with. The PowerPoint will be on our website, though, and so I'll have an iframe with the YouTube, and then the PowerPoint will be a downloadable option.
Okay. So, you know, there's some great stuff here about downloading tags on Flickr and looking at them for a sense of the meanings that people are attaching to different photographs. And then, as I talked about earlier, analyzing our own material on YouTube using the video search capability on NodeXL. And I just want to skip to the end. Just some quick contact information for me, and I'd love to hear from you what you're working on, and so on. And if I can help, I certainly will. And then finally, some references and some thanks to AAA and to Korea Fulbright and to Towson University, which is my home institutions. And thank you, Andrew, for enabling today's seminar.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for joining us. This has been very informative. Just as some housekeeping notes, thank you all, the attendees, for joining us. And thank you for the wonderful questions. Next, I guess 2 weeks from now, will be Karen Kelsky. Ramping up. Yeah, it should be a good one. We're ramping up for the annual meeting, so there will not actually be any webinars in December, but Karen Kelsky will be the last one of the year, and it will be focusing on getting an academic job. She is part of a workshop at the annual meeting entitled Hacking the Academic World, I think.
Right.
But it's very good, very informative, and if you're not making it to the annual meeting, it's definitely one that should not be missed. Unless, of course, you have no desire to be in the academic world, and then. Yeah. But yeah, no. Again, thank you, Sam, for coming, and thank you all for joining in.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, bye now.